Hey everyone, in this video we're going to do another short Latin story. Now this story is called A Bald People and it comes from George L. Bennett's Easy Latin Stories for Beginners. Now you've heard me say this before if you've watched any of the videos or stories in this series. What Bennett is calling easy Latin stories for beginners are not necessarily easy and they're also not necessarily for beginners. So I would say that these really aren't suited to a Latin 1 group only because it does contain, or all of them do contain, things like subjunctive and just a little more advanced Latin that probably I would guess most Latin 1 students haven't seen. So in my own class, I like to use these with my Latin 2, Latin 3 students, so kids who've taken or completed maybe middle school Latin and made it into that Latin 2-3 range. This really works well for them. And I think the great thing about Bennett is he has a nice collection that varies between myths, a little bit of history, things like Herodotus. Some have like a moral to them. So they're just a great way to read something different in Latin and break away from a traditional textbook. So I'd always encourage you to do that, right? Use them as a chance to break free. Read something different, because no matter what textbook you use, the stories eventually do become kind of repetitive and maybe a little boring. So this is a fun way to just spice it up a little bit, okay? So this video does come from Herodotus, and it's an account of a group of people in northern Asia, right beyond the Scythians. So if you're into your Greek history, you might know the Greeks encountered the Scythians a lot. They're that group that's to the far north. This is actually beyond them, okay? So according to Herodotus, they're beyond the Scythians, and apparently they're all bald, right? So that's why they're called a bald people. And Herodotus calls them the Argipi, right? So it's an interesting group. The baldness is kind of funny, but again, it's another chance to get a little bit of Herodotus telling about people. Interestingly enough, there are other references to these people. And the idea that you probably want to get is that because there are Greek colonies along the coast of the Black Sea, there would have been stories coming out of the groups of people that live up there, right? So Herodotus often gets a bad rap of making things up. I don't know if he's necessarily making it up. A lot of it he probably is, but a lot of it you can extract some truth from it and kind of unpack some key things if you can kind of sift through what Herodotus is kind of making a little more fanciful than it needs to be. So a lot of, or maybe not a lot, but some modern sources think that these people are related to the Mongols, which is kind of interesting. And the mountains that Herodotus refers to are the Ural mountain range. So that's kind of hard to prove. Herodotus is very old, right? It's really tough to pick through. But either way, Herodotus is always a really fun source for trying to understand the people that the ancient Greeks came into contact with. And he's always mixing some facts with his own version of events. But again, you can kind of sift through it and kind of judge for yourself. But they're fun stories to read. Now, before we go and dive into this, like I always do in these, I'll read the story to you. That way, if you have no one, no one to kind of read it aloud to you, at least hear my pronunciation. Not that it's anything fantastic, but it's better than nothing, right? So I'll read it to you. But what I would always recommend is that if you're a student and you have someone to read this story with, right, try reading it aloud to them, have them read it back to you. That way you can work on your speaking and your listening skills. You never want to just translate Latin in your head. That's never your best bet. So give it a whirl, okay? Like I always tell, that's the best way to do it. And again, you can do things like pre-reading if you want, try to get the vocab. You can use the read and reread method if you really want to dive in and make sure you understand this really well. But one way or another, have some fun with it, okay? So that being said, let's dive in and read it. So it starts like this. Evradices autorum montium habitant homines, qui calvi sunt omnes, mares pariter atque feminae et simonaso. Vestem gestant Scythicam, ceterum arborum fructu vitam sustenant. Ponticum nomen arboris est, qua aluntur fico ad modum similis est. Fructum autem fert fabae similem, nucleum intus habentem. Maturos fructus panis custodium, et qui ab is defluit niger et crassus liquorum et ligont et lacte mixtum bibunt. Ex faece massas conficiunt, quibus vescuntur. Percorum non magna illis copia est. Qui libet pater familia sub arbore habitat. Hieme quidem arborem tegunt tegmine e lana facto. His hominibus nemo injuriam infert, sacri enim habentur, nec arma ulla bellica habent. Idem et finitimorum controversias dirimunt. His nomen est Argipais. Okay, so let's pause the video there. Again, read through it on your own because my pronunciation rather is never anything fantastic, but at least you get to hear it once and then practice on your own. Have some fun with it, okay? So pause the video there. If you really want to dive in and unpack it, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, let's take it a line at a time and kind of unpack what's going on here. Okay, so it starts out by talking about a group of men, right? A people, right? They live at the roots of the high mountains, right? So you have homines habitant radices altorum montium, right? So they live at the roots of high mountains. And again, where these mountains are is kind of up for debate. And there are people who, right? Qui is referring to the homines, who are bald, right? Who are all bald. Calvi omnes sunt. Okay, so it's a bunch of bald people, the George Costanzas, right? He would have done well there. So it says that they're all bald, and then you have mares pariter aquae feminae, so men and women equally. And they had simonasso, they had flat noses, right, with a flat nose. So these flat nosed kind of bald people, sure, living up in the mountains somewhere. Okay. Then Herodotus describes them and what they wear. So you have Westem Gestan Scythica. So they wear the Scythian dress, right? So he's referring to the Scythians, that group to the north, and he's saying that this group, right, the bald people, are wearing similar clothing, which would kind of make sense if you're trying to unpack the truth here, right? So they wear the Scythian dress, and moreover, they sustain life, right? Vitam sustentant there. They sustain life with the fruit of trees, arborum fructu, right? So they're eating fruits, right? Which is nothing particularly crazy, right? That's how they live. Okay, whatever, right? Then you have Ponticum nomen arboris est. So he's talking about the tree that they eat from, right? And you have the name of the tree, the nomen arboris, is Ponticus, right? So it has this name, right? And it's a tree which, or by which, you want to say, qua aluntor, by which they are fed. Okay, so they eat off this specific type of tree. Okay, and then he says it's very similar to a fig tree. So fico ad modum similis est, right? So it's got these qualities of like a fig tree. That's what he says it's pretty similar to. Then he continues, right? And he was talking about the fruit. He says, fructum autem fabae similem, right? So it says it bears a fruit, right? Fer fructum. It bears a fruit similar to a bean, right? To a fabae, right? To a bean. Having a kernel inside, you might say, nucleum intus habentem, right? So it has this sort of kernel inside. And as a side note, he's probably talking about something with like an acorn, right? If the tree experts out there can kind of dive in and who knows, maybe there's something I just don't know about trees, but this is kind of a general sense of what he's trying to get at, right? So they have some sort of acornish type thing on them. Okay. Then you have they guard, custodian, right? They guard the ripe fruit, the maturos fructus. They guard it in cloths, right? And they lick the black and thick liquid which flows from it, ab east defluit, right? It flows out of it. So there's this liquorum, right? This liquid that they drink. Okay, and I will point out, you probably heard me in my pronunciation here. Bennett is using a particular word for the color black. Just don't be a jerk about it. We all know, if you've taken Latin before or studied it, there are a couple of alternates here. This is the word. I always tell my students, be respectful, be mature. I would say the same to you, my audience as well, in case you're wondering, right? So, a lot of modern textbooks try to avoid that word, but again, be careful and just don't be offensive with it, and you should be okay. But it's talking about the liquid that comes out of it, and there's this thick sort of milk or something, or liquid that comes out of this fruit, this acorn, and they drink it, right? So bibon, they drink this mixtum lacte, mixed with milk. So again, I have no idea what he's talking about. I don't know if people still do this, but sure, maybe it's like an almond milk type thing, right? I don't know. You have some sort of nut or acorn of a tree and put it in milk, and there you go, right? They're drinking the first sort of healthy almond milk. Why not? But they're drinking this stuff from the tree, right? They're eating the fruit and they're getting liquid from it too. Sure, why not? Okay. Then you have from the grounds, right? Ex fice, the ground up sort of stuff. They make dough, right? Conficiat massa. So they're making, and again, it's a little tough, the translation there, but it's basically getting at they're making like biscuits, right? So from the grounds of it, you grind it up, they make a dough on which they feed. Quibus vescuntur. Right, so they also use this tree to eat like biscuits or something like that. Right, that's the best I can kind of make of what they're making out of it. Again, if any of you have any ideas or know more about food coming from trees, maybe you can put it in the comments and tell me what they're making. Okay, then he keeps going. Right, he says pecorum non magna illis copia est. So the amount of cattle for them is not great, right? So they don't have a lot of cattle is the point. So they're finding alternate food sources way up in the north. Okay. Then you have qui libet pater familias, right? So any pater familias, the head of the family, lives under a tree. Sure, why not? Right? Again, it's kind of funny when you read Herodotus describing this. It's hard to kind of understand what he's getting at. But they live under a tree, and then you have indeed in winter hieme, right? They cover the tree with a covering, right? So the tegon, you could say, is they're covering the tree. Tegmine related with a covering, some sort of cover. And this cover is elana facto, made from wool. So I'm not sure what he's getting at. I had a vision of like putting a tent over the tree so you could live under it in the winter. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this. Again, Herodotus to me is always a little tricky when he's going into different people what he's getting at, but that's what it says literally, right? So they cover the tree with a wool covering, sure, right? And then you have the end here, okay? So you have his hominibus nemo injuriam infer, right? So nobody, nemo, nobody kind of inflicts injury, injuriam infer, or inflicts harm, you might say, on these peoples, okay? For habentor sacri, they are held sacred. They're held as sacred, so people leave these people alone, right? Nor do they have any weapons, right? So nec habent ulla arma. They don't have any weapons of warfare, bellica, right? So they don't have any weapons of war. Okay. Then you have these same people, so idem et finitimorum controversias dirimunt. So these same people also they settle controversies or disputes. Maybe disputes would be better, right? They settle disputes of their neighbors. So Herodotus is telling us that these people are kind of respected and they're not bothering anyone. So if you have two neighbors fighting out, you bring in these bald people and they kind of mystically solve your problems, right? Sure, why not? And then he gives the name, right? You have his nomen est argipais, right? So the name for them is the argipai, right? The bald people here. So again, an interesting story, just sort of a look at a different culture. And again, when it comes to Herodotus, you have to really parse through the truth and what he might be making up. But I love Herodotus just because I feel like he's always getting cool stories and turning them for what he wants. But I think the kernels of truth always give you an interesting idea of what's going on in the ancient world, right? That we wouldn't normally have. But either way, have fun with it. Try to read through. It's a little trickier in spots, but again, you should be able to work through it pretty well. You might have to look up some vocab as you go, but use it as a chance to break away from your textbook. So whatever textbook you're using, if you're a student, read this, have some fun with it. It's just something different. If you're a teacher, I like to use these with my students just to give them something to read, something different, and kind of break up the monotony that definitely can happen as you work through a Latin textbook. So one way or another, go for it. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. If you heard me, say something wrong or mistranslate something, of course, put it down below and we'll happily have a good talk. But otherwise, keep at it. And once you're able to read through this and understand it without needing any help, right, read it a few times. That's how you know you understood it and you're ready to move on. Good luck.